The TGA goal is really about ensuring the medical devices supplied in Australia are safe and that they perform as intended. And so today I will be going through a number of things in my presentation. I'll start off with an overview of the Australian regulation of medical devices. I will then talk about our process for adverse event report managing. I will then be talking through our continuous improvement and future direction. And then finally, I'll talk through a few of our real-world case studies and provide some market examples. So some of you may not have heard or know very much about the TGA. So what is the remit of the TGA? The TGA is Australia's regulator of therapeutic goods and is more commonly known as TGA or the Therapeutic Goods Administration. We regulate the quality, safety and performance or efficacy. And this really means that we make sure that a product does what it tends and it says it will do. And we also make sure that the Australians have timely access and availability to therapeutic goods. We really are focused on the safety piece, as I mentioned, and that means we look at devices for the whole of life cycle, from when an application reaches to the TGA to when it is no longer supplied in the Australian market. We look at multiple types of therapeutic goods at the TGA. There are medicines and biologicals, and of course medical devices, which I'm here to discuss today. And for us in the medical devices space, that is about the intended action of, which is typically by physical means. So mechanical action, if there's a physical barrier, anything that replaces or supports the organs or bodily functions, and of course things that do measurement of or monitoring of body and physiological functions. We have a number of key features to our regulatory framework. Firstly, for the majority of products that we monitor here at the TGA, they need to be included in the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. So we commonly refer to that as the ARTG. We have a classification system that is based on risk. So there are Class 1, 2A, 2B, Class 3 devices, and we also have the same structure for our IVDs. We have a framework that is based on essential principles, and these are really about the safety and performance of the device. As with other regulators, we have conformity assessment procedures, and of course we have oversight of devices through a range of post-market activities. Now, not all devices that are in the Australian market are regulated by the TGA. Some are exempt goods, and that means they don't need to be in the ARTG, however, they still require some regulatory oversight. And so for these devices, they're still required to comply with the essential principles, they're still required to undertake adverse event reporting, they're still required to meet the advertising code. Other devices are actually completely excluded from the ARTG, and these are products that are not regulated by the TGA. That means there is no ARTG entry and there is no regulatory oversight provided by the TGA. For these products, they're often regulated by some of the other regulators in Australia. That includes the Australian Commission for Consumer Goods or their state and territory ombudsmen and laws. So what does the risk framework look like? For medical devices that are regulated on a risk-based classification system, you'll see that as the risk increases, then our oversight and our approach increases. So for low risk, you might see things such as medical gloves. For low to medium risk, you might see IV tubing. And then we get all the way through to implantable pacemakers and other implantables. And you'll see from that data just on there, in the last year, the TGA has received almost 6,000 applications for inclusion in the ARTG, of which 235 of these were for IVDs. So from this data, you can see the majority of our applications are for Class 1 medical devices. I mentioned earlier that we look at the medical device life cycle, and that's really where the process starts. It's one thing to have an application approved and a product included in the ARTG, but keeping it on the market is really just as critical, if not more important, because it goes to the safety of the device, but also really protects the Australian public. So in our post-market space, we look and we investigate adverse event reports, We do trend analyses, so we see if there's a particular issue with a kind of device or if it is a sponsor-related device. We review technical and clinical information, and we ensure ongoing compliance with our essential principles. We sometimes do testing in our labs if we're concerned that there might be a risk. Other times we might initiate inspections. And of course, we have a range of expert committees that we talk to. But the most critical thing that we do is actually inform the consumers and the health professionals of what's going on, because our relationship with consumers and health professionals is as important as bringing the product in, because fundamentally, what happens with the product impacts them on a day-to-day basis. In terms of our adverse event reporting, at the moment it is mandatory for sponsors and manufacturers to report incidents of death or serious injury, or those events that could have resulted in a death or a serious injury had an intervention not occurred. And what you'll see is that in the last year we received almost 12,000 reports already for quarters 1 and 2 in 2025. We've received that much. So our trend in adverse event reports is increasing significantly. We're expecting at the moment to probably get to around 20,000 adverse event reports, and we expect this to continue to increase because we do know that we have a number of reforms that are going to really focus on what is happening in adverse event space and what we can do about any safety signals. So just moving to the next slide. Sorry, it's just frozen. Now my system's just frozen. While we give it a second to catch up, I'll talk you through the next slide. So we have a number of post-market obligations that are in place, as I mentioned. For adverse events, we really want to know about any problems that have occurred, but we also want to know about near misses. For us, near miss information is really just as important because it indicates to us if something may be going on that we need to investigate. We also look at things that are happening in clinical trials because we want to know if there's something we need to be concerned about. And we also want to look at compliance. So we monitor and ensure that people are continuing to meet their obligations. We want to make sure that any information is evidence-based, and we really, again, want to focus on public safety risks. The TGA website, I would very much encourage you to go and visit if you haven't already. It has extensive information on it in respect to what is happening with our reviews and with our other work. So if you're ever really interested in something that the TGA may be doing, you can hop onto our website and find the information there. So how do we manage the reports when they come through to us? The TGA is a risk-based organisation, and what that means is we do not investigate every single report that comes to us. Obviously, with over 15,000 reports so far, you can imagine we just do not have the human capacity to look at every single thing in detail. Having said that, whilst we may not investigate, we do triage, and that helps us to determine the priority. And we look at the information and we decide what we will investigate and what we won't. This really ensures that normal noise that may happen in data is not necessarily causing a product to be pulled from the market, and we continue to be a risk-based cost benefit and regulator. So we look at whether the event was reportable, whether the data is of sufficient quality, what level of risk there is for the patient, or if something new has changed, or whether the adverse event is really something that we would have already expected. In addition to our adverse event work, we also undertake what are called post-market reviews. Now, post-market reviews look at clusters of medical devices, so medical devices of a kind. What that means is we might look at all spinal cord stimulators, or all breast implants, or all face masks. So we look at these as a group in recognition that sometimes a signal might come out and it may not be a product specific, but maybe in relation to a whole class. And the colleague that was on the line earlier spoke to you about what they had done in terms of breast implants and risk. So, we've taken a similar approach when we are looking at our reviews. You'll see that in 2024, we had 46 signals and 49 reviews were created. And this was equivalent to 1,410 rather, ARTG entries. Now, each ARTG entry might have multiple products underneath it. For example, it might be company X syringe and there's 100 syringes under there. So it's a significant part of our work, and it really ensures that we are continuing to focus on where there might be risks. Recently, some signals we've looked at have actually been really patient focused. We've looked at spinal cord stimulators, and as a result of that review, we did have a number of cancellations from inclusion in the ARTG. Other products continue to be provided and available subject to what we call conditions. Now, under these conditions, they might include providing healthcare providers with more information about a product, or ensuring that there's additional information provided to patients should they be using these devices. We've undertaken a large review on sound abatement foam in sleep apnea devices and ventilators. And again, we have quite a bit of information on our website around some of the actions we've taken. Some products where we deemed them to be no longer safe for the Australian public were removed from the market. Others were allowed to continue with certain conditions provided to them. We've recently cancelled all home use fetal Dopplers. Now, this was in response to some signals where, very sadly, some infants lost their lives, where a mother was falsely reassured around the safety by using a Doppler. We've recently removed all vaginal rejuvenation devices, again due to lack of evidence around performance. We've done work with button batteries, which again are a real safety risk for infants should they be swallowed. In response to avian influenza, we looked at all our flu test kits and we made sure that they could actually pick up avian influenza should there be an outbreak within Australia. And most recently, we've removed all breast implants with microchips from the Australian market. But we have many other reviews open, and you'll see I've just put a list of some of those on the screen, including endoscopes, cybersecurity, some self-test kits, and of course you would know about vape devices. So our investigation outcomes, as I said, can lead to many ways forward. We sometimes inform health professionals and consumers about risks, and we do information through alerts or media releases. Sometimes we require changes to a product, or whether that be the instructions or the labeling. Sometimes we require recalls from the market, and I'll talk to recalls shortly. Sometimes we remove the products from the market if the delegate deems that they are just not safe for the public. Sometimes we ask the sponsors to do additional education. But fundamentally, the key ability of our framework is through post-market continuing to monitor for trends and changes, and if the risk changes, we then act. Most importantly, we work closely with other regulators as well, because sometimes other regulators might see a signal before we do. As I mentioned with recalls, we have recently undertaken a review of our recall processes. We shifted to what we now call the procedure for recalls, product alert and product corrections. Now, this replaced our old recall procedure, which had been in place for a number of years. We undertook a complete rewrite and we improved content and readability, but we also undertook changes in the language in the way that we talk about our recall actions. So you'll see from this slide, we really shifted from 8 different types of recall actions, and some were recall actions, some were non-recall actions, to what we call market actions. So these are now recall, a product alert, a product correction, or a quarantine. And it really has helped us to make sure that our language is as friendly as possible when it comes to alerting not just healthcare facilities, but also consumers what is happening in the recall space. So these are the types of market actions we take. We look at the class of recall, whether it's critical or urgent. We look at the type, so is it a recall or a product correction? And then we look at the level. Who actually needs to know what is going on? Is it a hospital? Is it a consumer? Is it a wholesaler? So in 2024, we've had approximately 1,000 new recall actions. Now, of these, 731 were market actions, and these have been published in the database for recalls. Which, again, I'd strongly encourage you, if you're interested to understand the types of recalls we're doing, to go to our website and have a look at the database. You'll see that the vast majority are in the medical device space, so 627. There were 92 medicines and 12 biologicals, and then we had an additional 60 blood recalls. For recalls that aren't related to therapeutic goods, such as those ones that I said that might be excluded, they would be managed by other regulators. For example, the food recalls might go through FSANZ, which is the Australian Food Regulator, or similarly, there's a consumer one for cosmetic products. We do have some changes coming up. We have recently made legislative changes to introduce mandatory reporting of medical device related adverse events by our healthcare facilities. So why did this change? We had a number of significant adverse events, and when we investigated these, we found that had the TGA known about some of these signals earlier, we might have acted to intervene sooner. And one of these ones was really around urogynecological mesh, where there was a large Senate inquiry in Australia that noted that a lot of this information had been held by hospitals and we just had not been provided it as a regulator. Part of this is really about driving early identification of safety signals and allowing us to be able to intervene sooner, because we know the sooner we can intervene, the better we can have an impact in respect to patient safety. So what does that look like? In March 2023, the legislation was amended, and we are now currently sitting in a 12-month voluntary reporting period. Under this period, it's really about having all healthcare facilities, all hospitals, get ready for reporting, getting their IT ready and getting their systems in place. From March next year, it will be mandatory for reporting to occur to us when it comes to death and serious injury. And then over the next few years, more and more reporting will come in place. Initially, we are asking for minimal data when it comes to reporting. So there will be a healthcare facility identifier that will be required. Where did the incident occur? We want to know when it occurred. We want a description of what occurred. We want to know any information they have about the device. And if they know it, we want to know who made the device. Of course, some hospitals are also wanting to give us additional information. And the more information that we have, the better. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the piece, I noted that sponsors are required to give us information. Now, what we call these are IRIS reports. So these come from sponsors and manufacturers, and of course, consumers can also provide those reports. The vast majority of our information does come from the sponsors and manufacturers, and our consumers and healthcare providers only make up a very small percentage, around 1 to 2%. So with those, as I mentioned earlier, they are triaged. With this new data stream that's coming in from the mandatory reporting from healthcare facilities, the data is a much smaller data set, so we'll be using it for signal detection. And then if we need more information, we will go back to healthcare facilities. The impact for our sponsors is minimal when it comes to this new mandatory reporting. We might reach out to them and ask for information, but of course continue to encourage anyone who is using a device who has a concern to speak to the manufacturer and the sponsor and let them know so that they can meet their obligations and appropriate investigation occur. This is something that has been coming along for quite a while, and it is a really critical and important piece of reform for us in Australia. The last piece I wanted to talk through is UDI, so Unique Device Identifier. So this has launched, and in May 2025, we officially launched the system. We already have some sponsors deciding to report in there, and really what this means is it is a unique identifier for every model of device on the label and packaging, and we are working through what that database looks like and triaging the start of the launch. On our website, there's significant information. So if you're interested or wanting to look at the rules or the information materials or the guidance, please do head over to the UDI Hub. There is a lot of great documentation and some short little video clips that help explain what is happening in the UDI space and what the requirements are. In terms of timeframes, again, you will see a tranched approach to rollout. So we will be fully up and running by the 1st of January 2029. Finally, the software as a medical device and AI regulation. In September of last year, we undertook a large review of our legislative framework to see if it was sufficiently fit for purpose when it comes to the regulation of software as a medical device and AI products. We looked at whether the guardrails were appropriate, and we looked at whether any changes were needed. We undertook significant stakeholder consultation, followed by a public consultation, and delivered a report to government in December. Our report sat in amongst other reports being looking at AI in government. Some of them were looking at privacy, others were looking at the general use of AI, and then there was others looking at cybersecurity. Our report is on our website and had 14 key findings. And for the most part, it found that our framework was relatively fit for purpose and continued to be appropriate and robust. However, that doesn't mean that additional refinements were needed, and these were clustered in under 5 priority areas. The first was supporting stakeholders. Is the information clear? Is the guidance appropriate? The next was about robust regulation and whether the regulation is associated, sufficiently covers the risk. The next was about reinforcing roles and responsibilities. Really critical for our healthcare providers and consumers was transparency, with many telling us they don't know when AI products are being used or their regulation. And finally, conducting compliance. Are people registering their products if they need to? So what's on the horizon? We've got some more work happening with adverse events and the reporting of exemption rules. We are looking at the exemption rules which are currently in place for adverse event reporting and seeing if they remain fit for purpose. We've finalised a medical device vigilance program, and this was focused at supporting industry in meeting their obligations, and we are currently doing a review of the pilot phase. And finally, we're looking at our data integration and analysis of safety signals. As I mentioned earlier, we are seeing such increased numbers with adverse event reporting. The ability to manually triage every adverse event will become more and more difficult. In terms of a quick case study, and I know I'm running short on time, I did mention briefly our home use fetal Doppler review. So we'd received a number of stillbirths reported to the TGA. We knew that parents were being falsely reassured that the baby was fine despite no movements. And what this meant was they were then not going ahead and seeking medical care. Under our review, we looked at every ARTG entry for this type of device, and we asked for clinical evidence, risk assessment, mitigation documents, benefit risk evaluations, and we then went about collecting that information and seeking expert advice on the benefit-risk balance. As a result of this review, all the ARTG entries for this kind of device were cancelled, and that was either by us as the regulator or by the sponsor. We didn't recall these devices, but we undertook a significant information campaign that we pushed out through our website, through obstetricians and other healthcare providers that deal with pregnant women, through social media, and we did a lot of work on taking down illegal ads from the internet to make sure that we could remove as many of these devices as possible. The next case study is around vaginal rejuvenation devices. For these ones, we'd heard significant clinical reports of harms associated with laser therapy that was alleged for restoring women following childbirth. We looked at all the entries again for the kind of device, and we required them to provide that information. Again, we found that for all these devices, we made a decision to either cancel them or remove this as an intended purpose. Now, this was either done again by us or by the sponsor. For these devices, they were, however, recalled because we did find that they were otherwise continuing to be used and it would be in the public interest for the recall to occur. We have, again, significant information on our website, and we did a large communication campaign to people who might be using these devices or might be working with women who might have had children. We did find that a very small number of clinicians did continue to use these devices, and we issued warning letters letting them know that the products were not appropriate to be used. So I will stop there and open up the floor for questions.